Now, for the first time ever, we're doing something different this year. We have this retreat, which will start momentarily. And we want this to be a little bit more intensive than regular sessions. The focus is to instill in us the willingness and the knowledge to do what we can as a collective here in the United States to ingratiate ourselves with the requisite education, with the requisite material, and to be able to utilize that and in an effective way to make change on the ground in Palestine. Because we understand that the United States provides Israel $3.8 billion a year in monetary aid, but also military aid and diplomatic protection at the United Nations. So the retreat will start off with focusing on the root cause, and that's essential for our understanding, because it is our job to deconstruct U.S. media and political discourse on the topic of Palestine and the Palestinian experience, specifically in relation to Zionism. And then we're going to move forward from that and to see how we can use advocacy to impact change on the ground and implement and encourage and influence our elected officials to implement policies that are beneficial and that is in line with Palestinian rights, but also how to utilize our collective efforts through our civic engagement, direct action, BDS, protests, rallies, various modes of advocacy that we can use, various modes of activism that we can use to further change on the ground and understand the global impact of all of this and how we are all connected in this struggle, and kind of broaden our outlook, but also implement some collective efforts here in the United States, because after all, we are in this country and we must do everything that we possibly can, more than any other country in the world, by the way. There's 195 nations in the world. If there's one country in the world where we have to be actively engaged on this issue, it is here, because it is our government that is directly involved and complicit in the first live stream genocide in the history of the world. So that is why we have this education retreat, and we hope that you enjoy it, and thank you for being here.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulullah. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you again for coming to the first session. First session is always kind of hard to start with, because people are still coming in and getting into the convention. But thank you for being here early, and sorry again for delaying a little bit. My name is Alaa Abusaman. I'll be the moderator for this session. This session is understanding the Palestinian relationship with Zionism. At the heart of the Palestinian experience lies the struggle against Zionism, an ideology and political movement that has shaped the region for over a century. This session will explore the Palestinian perspective on Zionism as an oppressive force, examining its historical roots, evolution, and enduring impact on Palestinian society. We will also look at the broader international movement against Zionism, situating this ongoing occupation within a global context. The aim is to provide a nuanced understanding of this deeply rooted issue, shedding light on the Palestinian experience and their resistance to Zionist policies. I'm joined here by three good friends and speakers: Noor, Tarek, Khalil, and Taher, Herzallah. We'll start with Noor. Noor is a social justice educator with over 15 years of experience in higher education and organizational diversity, equity, and inclusion. She currently leads learning content and delivery at Nova Collective, a company devoted to transform organizational cultures. She also serves on the Chicago chapter board for the American Muslims for Palestine. Without further ado, we'll leave you with Noor.
Assalamu alaikum. I mean, to be the first speaker is kind of like a big role. So I'm really excited to be here. The topic that I was given today is honestly a topic that many folks will spend entire careers studying. So we're going to spend just a little bit of time to like just ground ourselves in understanding the nuances of our Palestinian experience and how through the lens of the oppressed. So understanding our experience as Palestinians through the lens of the oppressed. It's a big topic to get us started with, and then I'll pass it over to Tarek and Taher to really base it in kind of the history of Zionism, and then what do we do next from here. It would be unfair and honestly unjust for me to start without really holding space and naming the land that we currently stand on and just the significance of starting this amazing conference on a day like today. It's pretty significant that regularly over Thanksgiving break that like we gather for the freedom of Palestine, to organize for Palestine. And so as we gather today, I want to just take a moment to recognize that this land that we are currently on was originally home to the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Miami, Kickapoo, and Potawatomi peoples who have stewarded this land for generations. We honor their history, their cultures, and their continuing contributions to our community. It's also really important for me to name that while many celebrate on this day, I really appreciate folks actually being here with us today. Although it's a day of celebration for many people, we also want to name that it's seen as a time of mourning for those who are indigenous to this land. And it's important for us to reflect on that history of the holiday and take time to think about how indigenous communities have been affected by the same type of settler colonialism that we as Palestinians experience. The land dispossession that Native Americans experience in the United States and throughout the world is one that we are learning and continuing to experience in this moment. As we watch the genocide continue to unfold in Gaza, it's very, very important, more than ever, that, you know, Thanksgiving isn't just as Muslims, we don't celebrate because it's an extra holiday, but that we're not celebrating because it's also a celebration of a genocide. So, I mean, why is this important? Well, it's very significant for us to be conscientious of the way in which our Palestinian experience is connected to the experiences of those who have been oppressed throughout history. I think a lot of times people are like, well, why, you know, I watch news story and article and documentary one after the next of people in Gaza saying, well, now that people know, why don't they do something about it? Or like, this has never happened in history. And the truth of the matter is, as humans, we are brutal people, you know, and, you know, Allah created us in that way, and how we're able to really recognize that this is not the first time that genocide occurs and not the last time that genocide will occur, but what responsibility do we have? And part of that is understanding the history of oppression in our world, right? And so that's why I wanted to begin with an understanding and a recognition of the experience of genocide of people here in this country, because, you know, Ta-Nehisi Coates in his most recent book on titled The Message speaks a lot about the experience of the Black Liberation Movement and understanding settler colonialism, because not only am I an oppressed people as a Palestinian person who identifies as indigenous to the land in Palestine, but I'm also a settler colonial living on settler colonial land. And so there's a dichotomy there that's very difficult to tease apart and make peace with, because we also think about, you know, Palestinian experience through the lens of those who have been historically oppressed, and must think about Jewish people because that's the nuance there. And so often when we're talking about, what happens in Palestine, we get told it's complicated, right? And the truth of the matter is, we know, and you've heard over the last year many, many times, if not throughout your life, that it's not complicated. It's pretty straightforward. It's a land that's stolen. What I will say is, as someone who has studied Arab Jewish history for a very, very long time, it's a very nuanced topic, because while it's very clear when we're thinking about settler colonialism here in the United States, who is the oppressed and who is the oppressor, the nuance within Palestine and is that, you know, the oppressor used to be oppressed. And so Ta-Nehisi Coates talks very vividly in his book, The Message, of the way of like understanding that, you know, as an oppressed people, I don't want to become an oppressor. That like there is a very thin line between being oppressed and oppressor. And how are we conscientious not to reach that place where like we become the oppressor because of our anger of being oppressed? So when I was charged with this huge task of talking about the Palestinian experience through the lens of the oppressed, one must remember that it's very easy to switch over. And that example is through those who are oppressing us as Palestinians. That example is through Zionism, is through the understanding of what Zionism represents. And Zionism, you know, for many years, and I think especially as an Arab person who speaks Arabic fluently, it's very nuanced because we'll talk about it as Jewish people and understanding that there's a difference. We have so many Jewish allies standing with us in the liberation for Palestine that like how we're able to understand that Zionism isn't a Jewish movement as much as it was a movement for settler colonialism, right? It is not a movement that's supporting the liberation of Jewish people as much as it is a white supremacist movement. Similar to that happened throughout the world. And while we look at it, we talk about colonialism and imperialism as if it was something that was way back when. It's a rude awakening for many people to understand that what was excused as an opportunity for individuals to almost reparations. And what's interesting is Ta-Nehisi Coates, who I just was talking about, this author talked about Israel being reparations for Jewish people and came to the understanding and realization after being challenged that actually that is not true, that Zionism is not a reparations, rather it is a support of the same white supremacy that he, as a black person here in the United States, has combated throughout his life. So again, Palestinian experience through the lens of the oppressed, the indigenous understanding, the way we perpetuate the experience of living on this land is key. It's part and parcel in understanding our experience in liberating Palestine. We cannot tease those things apart. We perpetuate that. And that's really hard to swallow, right? Because we come here for a land of opportunity and then come to the realization that actually in that process we are perpetuating the same kind of oppression that we struggled with and left our homeland with, right? Beyond that, understanding the black liberation movement is incredibly important, and understanding the ways in which that's also, part of the work that we do. So the Black Liberation Movement has worked tirelessly to understand the impact of white supremacy and the tenets of white supremacy. Things as simple, when you think of white supremacy like pitchforks and the KKK and, marching through the streets and, just like harsh oppression, and thinking that somehow, I think people are not very much understanding that like we've I think especially with our current moment in history, we're not in a post-racial society as we may have thought when Obama was president, right? And we somehow feel like we've evolved. And in doing so, we almost deny the fact that white supremacist culture is ingrained and weaved throughout our day-to-day. Things like a culture of perfectionism, things like a culture of understanding even like what's professionalism. And so how we're able to recognize the ways in which white supremacist culture is ingrained in our day-to-day allows us also to understand Zionism. Why? Because Zionism, once again, is a part of white supremacist culture. It's very much married together. The way that the United States and Israel are connected is through that white supremacist culture. And I think the more that we are able to, study this, spend time in this, make peace with the facts in which we perpetuate this, the better we are able to really understand our path toward liberation for Palestine. I'll stop there and I'll pass it on to Tarek to tell us a little bit more about Zionism and how the history of Zionism is connected to our liberation. Thank you.
We're one team. Thank you, Noor. Thank you very much. Very insightful. Now next, as Noor mentioned, will be with Tarek. Tarek, as you may know, he's an attorney, lecturer and he is the education coordinator for American Muslims for Palestine. Tarek.
Assalamu alaikum. Alaa, do me a favor, when I have 2 minutes left, let me know, because then I'll skip through my notes towards the end. I want to try to get to as much as possible. Okay. I want you all to come away with one thing after I'm finished. If there's one thing I want you to come away with, it's this: a definition of Zionism that you can put to memory. And the way that I put together a definition of Zionism is I looked at what the Founding Fathers said, what the Founding Fathers did, what Zionist leaders have implemented, have imposed on the Palestinian native population, and how it is being carried out today. So all of that together, we can infuse all of those elements and we can come away with a definition. And it's quite simple. And one thing that, if you really want to take this seriously, is read Israeli laws. Israeli laws. Laws that apply to Jewish Israelis, laws that apply to Arab Israelis. They call them Arab Israelis in Zionist discourse because Palestinians that live within the 48 area are denied their national identity. So they're referred to as religious subgroups: Druze, Christians, Muslims. They're divided in that way and not based on their national identity, because there's only one nationality that Israel recognizes: Jewish nationality. And I'm going to tell you why that is critical and why it can never change within the confines of Zionism. Okay, Theodor Herzl, the founder of political Zionism, he wrote Judenstaat, the Jewish state. He has a diary, over 1,000 pages of writings from Theodor Herzl, but also other members of founding fathers of Zionism. Israel Zangwill. You can look at years down the line, Menachem Begin, David Ben Gurion, Moshe Dayan, even Golda Meir, and they clearly state what the objective is. Theodor Herzl said, we must spirit the penniless population across the border, and we must do so discreetly and circumspectly. Well, and any action that you take as human beings, if you intend to do it discreetly, why would you do it discreetly? Because you know it's wrong. You know there's something immoral behind that act, so that's how you must carry it out. So it's a dispossessory kind of movement. But yes, nationalism is also an essential element of Zionism, because the founding fathers of Zionism wanted to change the meaning of what Judaism is. Okay, it's not just a religion. It represents a nation. It represents those that share a common culture, a common language, a common history. But there's one key element in Zionism that Zionist leaders don't talk about as much, but have implemented heavily in Palestine. The founding fathers of Zionism talked about it a lot. Modern day Zionists don't mention it as much. It's a colonization movement. And the founding fathers said so openly. Who knows Cecil Rhodes? He was an English minister. Theodor Herzl wrote him a letter. And he knows of British colonialism, Theodor Herzl. Understood it very well. And, okay, you're focused on Africa. There's a lot of colonization from British in Africa. This is Asia Minor. Why should this be important to you? And he said, and I quote, because it is something colonial. And you love colonialism. So I want to bring you to our side, because what we're doing is exactly what you're doing in Africa. We want to exploit. We want to take. We want to oppress, so on and so forth. So Israel is founded on that ideology. You can't divorce Zionism from the state of Israel. And embedded in the Balfour Declaration is that same dismissive, derisive attitude that the founding fathers of Zionism had toward the indigenous population. If you look at the Balfour Declaration, the text, 67 words. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for who? For the Jewish people. And will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. Remember, at this time, 9/10 of the population was not Jewish. It was Palestinian Arab. So 9/10 of the population written off completely. Oh, hold on a minute, comma. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. Notice what that means. Religious and civil rights are individual rights. Okay, fine. We're not gonna break those. But national rights, political rights, they're not for you. They're for another people that we intend to plant in the land. But the only way to do so is by removing the indigenous population. And notice the reference to the indigenous population. We are referred to in the negative as non-Jewish communities. That's in the text of the Balfour Declaration. The word Arab is not there. The word Palestinian is not there. Non-Jews. We are the other. We're otherized. We're different, even though we are the owners of the land, even though we are indigenous to the land, even though we are in the soil of the land. We've been there for millennia. Yet we are not the indigenous population. We are dismissed completely. So Israel, when it was founded in 1948 as a result of the dispossession of 750,000 Palestinians, 200,000 of whom, by the way, fled to Gaza. That's why the 80% of the population in Gaza is refugees, but that's another topic. And now they make up around 8 million or so refugees around the world. 160,000 remained in what became the state of Israel. So Israel immediately, when it enacted its laws, made sure to distinguish between the Palestinians that remained and the Jewish population, which became a majority in 1949. So Israel makes a distinction in its laws between citizenship and nationality. There are two cases in the Israeli Supreme Court. Tamarin case and Ornan case, and I'll give you the citations on those if you want to read them yourself. But the high court in Israel struggled to make a distinction. There was a Jewish person that wanted to be registered in Israel as Israeli. If you become American, you're an American national. Why can't we become Israeli national? It made intuitive sense. It made logical sense. But the court said, oh, hold on a minute. There's a minority here that used to own the land. They used to be the majority. We kicked out most of their people, but some of them remained. If we recognize an Israeli nationality, they become equal to us. We cannot have that. But it's a liberal court, right? The High Court of Justice is a liberal court. So we can't come out with our overt racism and say that, so we have to cleverly deny an Israeli nationality. But how do we couch the rhetoric? I'm going to read you a quote from one of the justices who was the president of the Israeli Supreme Court. Because he interpreted one of the basic laws. Basic law is basically a form of constitutional law. Israel does not have a written constitution, but it does have basic laws, which together amount to a constitution, quasi-constitution, basically. There's a basic law titled Human Dignity and Liberty. It was enacted in 1992. There's a word that was intentionally omitted. What word do you think that is? Human dignity and liberty. What's missing? Equality. That was intentional. That was not just happenstance. That was not accidental. It was intentionally omitted. Why? Because the moment that you constitutionalize equality, you dismantle the apartheid system that Israel was founded upon. The moment you constitutionalize equality is the moment that Arabs become Palestinian. And once they become Palestinian and they have that nationality recognized for them, then they become equal to the state. You negate the JNF, the Jewish National Fund, which works closely with the government, with the state of Israel. And the charter of the JNF is to hold land for Jews in perpetuity. So now we can't work on behalf of Jews alone. Now we have to be equal. Now we have to apply equality. We can't discriminate anymore. We can't have that. So we have to cleverly get around this Israeli nationality thing. So we can't recognize that. So Justice Aaron Barak, who, by the way, was one of the ad hoc justices in the ICJ opinion when South Africa sent its application for the crime of genocide. He was one of the justices. Aaron Barak said, and I want you to listen carefully to this, the right to equality is an integral part of the right to human dignity. But not all aspects of equality that would have been included had it been recognized as an independent right that stands on its own are included within the framework of human dignity. Only those aspects of equality that are closely and objectively connected to human dignity are included within the framework of the right to human dignity. What the heck is that? That's how lawyers speak. They just jumble up a bunch of words and they present it as though it sounds flowery and beautiful. What he's saying is this. I can't say there's no equality. I mean, we're democracy. We're the only democracy in the Middle East. I have to word it in a way where it says that, but not really. And that's exactly what he's saying. If equality is consistent with human dignity, okay, fine. The Palestinians can have that. But anything beyond that, no. Because there's still a hierarchy in place. Jewish supremacy is the law of the land. So Aaron Barak stays within what is known, what is coined as the Zionist paradigm. The Zionist paradigm is maintaining Jewish supremacy because most of the Jews that came to Palestine came from Europe. Israel was founded by the Ashkenazi Jewish Yishuv. So we must maintain, okay, I'll finish up right here. There's a whole host of laws that enshrine this Jewish supremacy. And in that same law, there's an exception. It's called the limitation clause. The exception is this. If we implement an infringement on the right to equality, we can do that so long as it befits the values of the state of Israel. That sounds nice, befitting the values of this. But what are those values? Jewish and democratic. Jewish. So if we want to maintain Jewish supremacy, we can discriminate against you. Forget your equality. And that's everything flows from that. What's happening in Gaza flows from that. The separation of Gaza flows from that. The entrenchment of the occupation in the West Bank flows from that. The denial of repatriation for the refugees flows from that. So Zionism, in practice and ideologically speaking, is a nationalist movement. That is absolutely true. It's a nationalist and settler colonial movement predicated on European conquering ideology and infused with a political mission of establishing an exclusively Jewish state at the expense of the indigenous Palestinian population. That is Zionism. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you again, very much. As always, mashallah, very knowledgeable, and you give us a lot of information. Thank you very much. Now I'll leave you with Taher Herzallah. Taher is the Director of Outreach and Grassroots Organizer at AMP. He's also doing his PhD in American Studies at the University of Minnesota, where he's doing his dissertation on American Muslim political activism for Palestine.
Thank you for the very warm welcome. جزاكم الله خيرا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني. So my understanding is that the retreat is supposed to be a more intensive workshop for the attendees who are the most committed to learning, engaging the material, and then hopefully taking this information to either replicate this model or to teach others. And so my talk will require you to have a pen and paper handy, because I will be mentioning the names of books, articles, reports that I think will be very useful for you in future work, inshallah, as you continue on this path. From its inception as a political project rooted in European colonialism and attached to the imperial aims of Western powers, Zionism has had to claim its territory ideologically, as Tarek alluded to. In fact, Theodor Herzl's goal to establish a national home for Jews using colonial methods at the expense of the indigenous population of Palestinians was not an idea widely accepted by the majority of Jews in his own part of Central Europe, let alone Jews and Gentiles the world over. In fact, the earliest opposition to these internal debates had among the Jews of Europe came from Central European and Russian Jews who saw Zionism as a problem for their own political projects, namely building their power domestically in the countries they were living in. There were even other forms of Jewish nationalism that didn't necessitate the mass exodus of Jews to Palestine. Some of you may have heard of Bundism, for example, which was a secular Jewish socialist movement which articulated a deterritorialized nationalism in Eastern Europe. Bernard Lazare, the French literary critic and early Zionist, who was close to Herzl, traveled with him and was even welcomed to roaring applause at the World Zionist Congress in 1897, also fell out with Herzl because his vision of Zionism was not nationalist in nature. Lazare didn't believe in establishing a state, but rather an emancipation of sorts of Jews and organizing with Europe's Jewish proletariat. He criticized Herzl and early Zionists as bourgeois in thinking, feeling, and ideas. There were also some lively debates among some of Europe's most prominent Jewish thinkers, and Zionism was critiqued heavily by the religious and Orthodox Jews who saw Zionism as a secular nationalist project far removed from the scriptural ethics of Judaism. But eventually, Herzl, Weizmann, Chaim Weizmann, and his gang, coupled with major political events of the late 19th century, with the backdrop of European imperial encroachment on West Asia and North Africa, led to a convenient and calculated combustion of sorts that initiated Zionism's hegemonic quashing of a significant portion of Jewish descent. Basically, the main reason Zionism succeeded where other ideas did not was because they had the backing and buy-in of the world's most powerful empire at the time in Great Britain. Zionism would go on to be a useful and powerful tool of imperial repression around the world, from Palestine to Central and South America to the African continent and Asia. Zionism and Israel, its nation-state manifestation, played a huge role in subverting democracy, fighting indigenous autonomy, and perpetuating mass murder around the world. In fact, the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network published a full report on the subject back in 2012 titled Israel's Worldwide Role in Repression. And Israel Shahak's famous 1982 book, Israel's Global Role, Weapons for Repression, among many others, highlight the myriad ways that Israel acts on behalf of first Great Britain and then the United States to create instability and destruction around the world. Here in the United States, Israeli officials worked with American Zionist groups to quash dissent as well. Among the most vocal opponents in the early and mid-20th century were actually Jewish rabbis and thinkers who saw Israel as nothing more than a colonial endeavor. The famous story of Jewish American scholar Don Peretz, who was the first to write his dissertation about Palestinian refugees in the early 1950s. The study that he did was considered so authoritative that it was published as a book that for years was used as a college text on the subject. Peretz's work earned him attention from the American Jewish Committee, which was not outwardly Zionist yet at the time. They transformed as an organization over time. Founded at the turn of the 20th century, the organization had spent decades advocating first for civil and human rights for American Jews, and later for oppressed groups worldwide. Concerned about the plight of Palestinians and worried that their mistreatment by Israel would increase American anti-Semitism, the AJC in 1956 hired Peretz as a researcher. Peretz would even send letters to Secretary of State John Foster Dulles with ideas as to how the United States can formulate policy with regards to the Palestinian refugees. Israeli officials, of course, did not like this and immediately went to war with Peretz. They pressured the AJC to do away with him. They cut his hours and his work to censorship, and they subject his work to censorship. They even required the AJC to send any published material prior to publishing to the Israeli consulate in New York or the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. to approve the text before it was published. Eventually, Don Peretz quit in 1958. But no people felt the full weight and brunt of Zionist repression more than Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims. Zionist oppression of the Arab and Muslim world is very well documented in the region, is well known to all of you. But here in the United States, Zionist repression goes back at least a century. From the first Palestinian activists to testify in Congress in the early 1920s, to the student movement of today, Zionists have deployed a number of tactics to ensure the dominance of their narrative and the exclusion of ours. Smearing, defamation, boycotts, blackmail, intimidation, and even assassinations have been used by Zionists in the United States to quash dissent and prevent the possibility, even the smallest possibility, of a loss of U.S. support for Israel. In the 1930s and 40s, Zionist groups attacked a prominent Palestinian, Dr. Fuad Shatara, a Haifa-born physician who practiced medicine in Brooklyn, New York. Some of you may have heard of him. He was a prominent leader in the Palestine Anti-Zionist Society who took to newspapers and radio stations to discuss the situation on the ground, to bring and shed light on the plight of the Palestinians. He spoke against the British mandate and Zionist settlement of Palestine. Zionist groups worked to ban him from speaking on radio stations and even tried getting him fired from the hospital he worked at in Brooklyn, New York. Dr. Shatara was under immense pressure and was subject to vicious public attack campaigns. And after years of going through this, he took his own life. He left his wife a suicide note explaining, and I quote, "My nerves are frayed, my health undermined, and I cannot go on any longer." But Zionist repression didn't take place simply because Zionists like to do it. For everyone knows that a lie needs a whole story and movement in order to make people believe it. More lies have to be told, and more misinformation needs to be created in order to confuse people and make the truth hard to discern. Zionism's repressive tactics are due to the overwhelming support and solidarity that Palestinians have from around the world. No other movement and people have such widespread and committed organizing happening on its behalf or in support of it like the Palestinian cause does. It's truly an incredible thing if you sit down and study it. The Palestinian people, who have never had a state, have no standing army, no central bank of its own, have effectively and resiliently forced their existence upon everyone through sheer will and determination. Palestine is not only a cause that stands firmly in opposition to imperialism and colonialism, it is seen by so many around the world at the intersection, of discussions on academia, art, immigration, capitalism, state violence, journalism, film, science, and the environment, ethics, and so much more. The edited volume by Sorcha Thompson and Peli Valentin Olsen titled Palestine in the World, International Solidarity with the Palestinian Liberation Movement highlights these important connections. And I'll end with the following. The Palestinian people have created organizations small and large. We've established unions and cooperatives. We've built relationships with countries around the world. At one point in the early 1980s, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, had more embassies and offices around the world than Israel did. Palestinians have organized mass protests, strikes, conferences, violent and non-violent resistance, and forced their case on the agenda of global politics. None of this could have happened without the incredible and unrelenting support of people around the world, people from every continent and creed, whose solidarity is so crucial to the longevity of this cause and the hope that we will in fact free Palestine. And I'm sorry, I have one more sentence. To last so long, under the most difficult circumstances, and against the most powerful forces in the world, inspires people the world over. It is nothing short of a miracle that is not only going to be inscribed in the annals of history, but is now studied and pondered upon today. This is not something to gloss over lightly. We must be proud of what we have already achieved. And I thank you.
Thank you very much, Tarek. Taher, sorry. Taher and Tarek. Thank you, everyone. Before, I think it's time maybe to open platform for audience for questions. Anyone has questions? We'll give like maybe 10 minutes for questions from audience.
Yes, I have one question.
Give me a second.
Thank you for this presentations. And I have one question to Tarek. Since he highlight things in such a way, now the question that is coming as a person who is interested on that situation, which is for us very, very important in terms of justice. As you know, there is the situation of two states or one state. The question is, Israel, they refuse two states. And one state, it's not working since you talk about the equality. That's not can be possible for the Palestinian citizen. So what's the Israeli want to do with the Palestinian?
I don't care what Israel wants and what it likes. What I care about is what is fundamentally fair and what is enshrined in international law. So the framework that I use is the framework of rights. And this is the framework that is enshrined in international human rights law, international humanitarian law, refugee law, a whole host of different laws. So, for example, you said Israel does not want the two states. Israel also does not want the ICC issuing arrest warrants. I don't care what Israel wants, what Netanyahu wants, what Yoav Gallant wants. You committed war crimes against humanity. More crimes should have been attached to that ICC warrant, by the way. That fell way too short, believe it or not. ICC didn't even go far enough. So what I care about is what international law enshrines. Zionism, which is premised on oppression, which is premised on apartheid, which is premised on subjugation. You have no rights under international law. So the fact that you want to maintain a Jewish demographic majority. Now, by the way, if these things happen organically, the issue has never been with Palestinians opposing things that happen organically. It's things being imposed upon them. So, for example, if over time, let's say, from the 1800s all the way up until the 1900s, Jews just outpopulated the Palestinian Arab population organically. They just had more babies. Based on basic statistics, that wouldn't have happened. But let's just say that did happen. The Palestinian Arab population would not have rose up and said, "Oh, we have to stop this." It's the imposition of this political ideological movement, the settler colonial movement, that caused that to happen. And if you look at the various British documents, now we're just focusing on the mandatory period. If you look at the basic British documents, the official documents, the 1921 Palin Report, the 1922 Commission Report, the 1929 Shah Hopeson Report, the 36 Peel Commission Report, all of these reports never came back with any indication of anti-Semitic sentiment. It came back with the sentiment of fear of losing their livelihood, fear of losing their land, fear of losing their economy. So the rights that come out of that are the rights that I want to impose. Now remember, we love talking the word peace, right? What Palestinians demand is not peace. We aspire to peace. All human beings want to see peace. We definitely aspire to peace, but we demand justice. And if peace comes about as a result of that, great. If it doesn't, then, we'll work towards that. But justice is not something that is negotiable. So any kind of framework that Israel wants or likes, that's irrelevant to me. I want rights imposed, not negotiated. And I think I speak for a lot of Palestinians, if not all.
Salam Tarek. Allah barak feek. Do you have like any resources to basically list out these Israeli rules, regulations, laws that basically outright state that they're committing apartheid? Like, where can I start reading about that?
Look up ACRI, ACRI, and also Adala. Adala has the list of all these laws. Some of them are in Hebrew, but a lot of them are translated into English, and a lot of them you can get them in Arabic as well. So, and Taher can add to that.
And there's also been like 3 major human rights reports demonstrating in detail all of the ways that Israel imposes a system of apartheid on Palestinians. Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, Amnesty International, all 3 organizations just in the last 2 years have published these reports. So, and it's very meticulous.
But if you want to engage in this in a deep way and actually look up legal opinions and the laws word for word, go to Adala and ACRI, and then and actually also the Knesset website, and you can actually pull that information.
Assalamu alaikum. Question for Taher. First of all, Jazakallah khair for all that information. I have notes written down. I wrote down the text that you mentioned. I guess the question I have is, I think there's a lot of people in this country who see what's happening in Gaza. They recognize it's genocide, but they don't truly understand, like, well, what is Zionism? Like, how did Zionism come to be? So the question I have is, like, how do you take this information that you mentioned, the different texts you mentioned, and, like, synthesize it in a way where you could tell the average person, well, this is what Zionism is, and this is how we got here, where to them it's not like, oh, it's too complicated, where it's like, oh, wow, this makes sense, and this is really messed up. So I don't know if you had any advice on that.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think that's something that we grapple with all the time. And I think one of the best ways for me to articulate what Zionism is to people is to couch it in the terms of European colonialism. Because a lot of people understand, we all learn in school, when we're in grade school, in high school, what imperialism is and what colonialism is. This is something that we're taught in social studies and history classes. We learn about the British colonization of India. We learn about, Dutch Empire, the Portuguese Empire, the British Empire, et cetera, et cetera. And so when we couch the understanding of Zionism within or as an extension of European colonialism in the region, then people start to understand it a lot better. And you start to detach it from these ideas of Zionism being this sacred Jewish concept, which is not true. And also you get to now throw in the examples that I brought to you with all the different ways that early Jewish thinkers opposed Zionism as well. So I think that for me is the angle that I always approach it. But Tarek and maybe Noor might have a...
If you have a question, please raise your hand so I can see you. I'll take you in order, but let's keep it short for the question and for the answer, please.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah khairan for your talks. My question is, what can we do here to push the Arab countries, especially the Khalij, to do something?
I think it's the best use of your time and resources is to push the U.S. government. because at the end of the day, what the Khaliji governments are going to do is based on what the American government tells them to do. Whatever the Pakistani government does is going to be based on whatever the American government decides for them to do. I mean, this is the most apparent thing that we've seen in the last year, the hegemonic power the United States has over the rest of the world. So in order for us to actually move forward in these changes, then that's what we need to do. Now, if you want to talk about on a societal level, I mean, that's up to you how you want to engage with, you know, the Khaliji public or the Iraqi public or the Moroccan public. That's a whole different discussion. But on a government level, I think it's a waste of our time to think that we can make those influential, make those changes or influence their decisions.
Okay, you don't forget to pass the mic to Noor also.
No, I actually have no.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Kauthar. I am indigenous to these lands. I'm from Oregon. And I just want to say thank you for acknowledging my people. I was really not expecting that coming here. I've been doing a lot of organizing in my own community, trying to wake up my reservation, the people on my reservation, because a lot of them have been colonized so much and assimilated to what the United States has done. And so I really appreciate and thank you, Noor, for, I don't like land acknowledgements, but coming from a Palestinian, it's just really appreciated. I don't like the white savior doing it because it just makes me mad. So but I just want to say thank you. And you know, I've seen Taher talk before, so I really appreciate you guys doing this retreat because it really refills my cup. In December on Thursdays on my reservation, I'll be doing Palestine Education Nights, and it's called Roots of Resistance. And I'll be showing documentaries for 4 Thursdays in December to wake up my community, to show them the parallels, and to stand with Palestine. So thank you.
What was your name again? What was your name?
It's Khalida.
Khalida?
Khalida. And I go by Kauthar.
Thank you, Kauthar. Thank you, Khalida. I also do not like land acknowledgements, and also feel like it's the bare minimum that I could do to at least center ourselves in understanding that we are on stolen land. I think that when for a very long time we've lived on this land thinking that we somehow are owed something, or that like if we work hard enough we can achieve, and to come to the understanding and realization that much of it is unearned privilege, I think is very important for myself as a Palestinian. I mean, quite honestly, very humbled by your gratitude, because it is very much the bare minimum. So thank you, Kauthar. Also, I'll just add that please ask Kauthar for more information on the work that she is doing, because I think it is incredibly important for us to be educating ourselves on the history of the indigenous peoples here, because if we are not aware of the ways in which we perpetuate that, then we are really just, it's a double standard, quite honestly. Thank you.
All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So there were sort of two different perspectives presented by Noor and Tarek. On one hand, you have, you know, it's very important to differentiate between Jews and Zionists, and some Jews are allies, some aren't necessarily so. And then I guess Tarek kind of brought up another perspective of the right to Israel is very deeply ingrained into the religion of Judaism. And so you also have high rabbis that say that, some of them say that it's a commandment to live in Israel. The Torah clearly states that Israel has been given to them as a right to live there, as their birthright. And so how do you go about that dilemma where, yes, we do have some Jewish people that are on our side, that are supporting our cause, but at the same time, it's kind of like, are they really allies? But we should also keep some distance to keep safe. You know,
it is very nuanced, and I'll say this: the people that I'll share, and then I'll hand it off to Tarek. I think that the folks that I work with, that I identify for myself are Jewish allies. Oftentimes we'll talk about the struggle of Zionism for themselves, because Zionism to them, although very much ingrained in the faith and the cultural scripture, is very much connected to being able to live anywhere in the world and freely practice and express their Judaism and Jewish identity. And that Israel and Zionism, in the way that it's understood nowadays, has very much hijacked that feeling. Right? So understanding that, like, this particular type of Zionism that currently oppresses Palestinian people isn't the same type of Zionism that folks all around the world aspire towards. Understand that. So while we are anti-Zionist, many Jewish people still identify as Zionists, but don't identify with Zionism in the way that it is. Okay, I don't know how to deal with that, but I think understanding it is very important.
I know how to deal with that. Very simple. Actually, I can give an example of an individual who I believe struggled with this a lot and is a scholar of sorts. Oh my God, I forgot his name. Peter Beinart. There we go. Peter Beinart came out with an article a few years ago during the height of COVID, rejecting his two-state solution stance, and says that I just don't see that. And he wrote it was 3,500 words, and he struggled with it just like I explained how the court struggled with citizenship and nationality. He struggled with it in the same way, because if he were to come out full boat and just admit what Zionism is, then his scholarship would kind of lose a lot of credibility as well. So here's how I think as a Palestinian collective we should deal with this. I don't care what strand of Zionism that you belong on. At the end of the day, the Zionism that the Palestinians experience is the Zionism that we know. So if you have this different conception of Zionism that is not rooted in fact, not rooted in history, not rooted in the statements and utterances and policies of the founding fathers of Zionism, okay, if you want to call it the new wave of this new definition of Zionism, fine. But that does not negate whatsoever what has taken place over the last 76 years, what has taken place throughout the period from 1882 to the present, which is when the Zionist colonization project began. It doesn't negate any of that. And if you're not even into the whole label, fine. Let's take the label out. There's a people that live there, lands taken from them, they were kicked out of their homes. There's not a single moral argument that you can present that says that they do not have the right to return. I don't care if you don't recognize a Palestinian nationality. I don't care if you want to recognize them as human beings. I don't care about that. At the very least, they deserve their rights to come back. And if you don't want to recognize them as individuals, fine, but that does not negate the rights that they carry. So that's how you deal with that. And by the way, there's this new trend of what Zionism is to a lot of young Zionists today. Zionism just simply means the self-determination of the Jewish people. Well, the history negates that completely. So where did you get this from? Because it's not Theodore Herzl that said that. It's not Menachem Begin that said that. It's not David Ben-Gurion that said that. It's not Moshe Dayan that said that. It's not Israel Zangwill that said that. They probably don't even know these names. But they do, their work does not replicate this newfound vision that you have. So look at history, understand it, and that's how you ingratiate yourself with the right way to respond to these types of claims. And I believe that's the way to deal with it. Zionism, the way that I just laid it out, if you don't know the way, if you were not here, please write it down, because every single word that I put in that definition that I formulated is purposeful and is grounded in history and the ideology itself. Zionists gave me the definition. I did not make it up.
I just want to build on what Tarek said, because I think it's really important. I don't think we have to spend so much time rationalizing why someone would be a Zionist or what their interpretation of Zionism is. Tarek's point was on point. We look at the way Zionism manifests itself. And the manifestation of Zionism is through ethnic cleansing, colonialism, apartheid, and genocide. We don't need anybody else to come and explain to us what a definition of Zionism is, or what it could have been, or what it could be. I mean, these are all things that are fantastical, theoretical concepts that we don't need to busy ourselves with. We need to busy ourselves mostly with how do we end the suffering of the Palestinian people by addressing Zionism as it is, not as it is somehow conceived of by some individual somewhere in New York City. I mean, these are things that are very important for us. And I always have Zionists trying to sort of catch me with the gotcha question. You might have heard this question many times before, and you might know which question I'm talking about. Do you believe in Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state? Has anybody heard this question before? I'm sure you have, of course. I mean, you wake up in the morning and somebody asks you without even you trying, right? At Palestinians, we get asked this question a lot. And one time I had this debate with a guy I was sitting on a panel with from J Street, who's like like a liberal Zionist organization, and there was someone in the audience who stood up, an older gentleman, and he said, and he wanted to catch me with this question, thinking that I'm going to be startled or something, or get me. And do you believe that Israel has a right to exist? And I said, sir, I'm going to respond to you with 4 words: not at my expense. I don't have to give you this long argument for you to understand that fundamentally what I oppose about the state has nothing to do with your Judaism or with your belief. I frankly don't care. I don't care if it was a Hindu state established. I don't care if it was a evangelical Christian state that was established. I don't care if it was a Buddhist state that was established. Whoever did it didn't really matter to me. What matters to me is that my people are occupied, my family is going through ethnic cleansing and genocide. So for us, I think as a Palestinian people, as people who are constantly in this sort of dialectical engagement with Zionism here in the United States, I think that's something that we need to be aware of and be confident and assertive about how we address.
Thank you very much. We're a little bit over time. I have one last question, and please excuse us for not taking all the questions. Probably maybe you can chat with the brothers and here Tarek, Taher, and Noor after the session. But last question, and I will end up with a question from my side just to wrap up the topic, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. I want to thank all of you for excellent presentations. I just want to talk, you mentioned the Balfour Declaration. My understanding was that the Balfour Declaration came about because the British government had this sense that they could gain financial help of wealthy Jewish industrialists and especially bankers. I'm thinking of Rothschild and so on. And to Taher's case, many Jews were not in favor of Herzl's Zionism because it interfered with some of their very successful assimilation efforts over the previous few decades. So when the British government said that, but they eventually won the war, do you feel that the British government wanted a Jewish state to start there? Because this was started during 1970, when the war was still going through. So the war was over, it came out to their satisfaction, they won the war, they didn't need their money anymore. Because eventually this became a huge headache for them when they were trying to keep the mandate going. So was this a project that they really wanted to keep going later on, do you think?
The thing is, that's such a great question, and I gave a whole teaching on that one question. Like, I can spend an hour with you on this. So, but just to make it simple, and we can talk after this. The reason why the British put forward the Balfour Declaration, 4 reasons kind of go hand in hand. Now, how you weigh them, which one mattered more than the other, that's a topic for debate. But the Great Britain wanted to win the war. 2, they wanted to maintain their imperialist ambitions. Remember, Palestine was the gateway to their crown jewel, India. Remember, they had a lot of colonial gains at that time, but there's a whole history behind that itself. 3, Orientalism, actually. This notion of, okay, who cares? By the way, Balfour said 2 years after the Balfour Declaration, Zionism is of profounder import than the prejudices and feelings of the indigenous population. 700,000 Arabs, I don't care what they think. So Orientalism was a key part of it, but also anti-Semitism. Balfour himself was an anti-Semite. In 1905, as Prime Minister of Great Britain, he spearheaded what is the Aliens Act, the 1905 Aliens Act. And what it basically said, and I don't want to get into the legalese, hey, I don't want the Jews to come here. Send them somewhere else. Oh, Palestine, there we go. We don't want the Jewish problem. They called it a problem. We don't want the Jewish problem on our soil, so let's send them somewhere else. So all these reasons kind of go hand in hand as to why the Balfour Declaration was put forward. Balfour Declaration stuff went through 5 different drafts. That was actually the watered down draft. The first draft was actually very extreme. Great Britain did not want to be beholden to that draft. They wanted some flexibility, and they were able to get it. And once it was infused into the British mandate for Palestine, word for word, by the way, and actually added more to it. They actually made it a little more extreme in the mandatory period. They realized 25 years in that it wasn't going to work out. And in 1939, they issued the white paper to limit immigration, and we all know what happened 8 years after that, the Nakba. And but there's a whole chapter that I didn't go over here, but I'll leave it at that.